My name is Sujan Pak, and I'm Dean of the School of Theology, and it is my great joy and honor to welcome you to the opening session of the inaugural Father Vincent Machozi Colloquium. This event has been a dream in the making. It began with the establishment of a fund entitled Father Vincent Machozi Endowed Scholarship and Lecture on Building Justice and Peace Fund. This fund was established by my former predecessor, Dean Mary Elizabeth Moore, in 2021, in commemoration of Father Vincent Machozi, who was gunned down in the Democratic Republic of Congo on March 20th, 2016. An alumnus of BU School of Theology, Machozi received an STM just the year before, in 2015, having cut his studies short because of a strong call to return to his home country to advocate for human rights and ecological justice there. We will hear much more about Father Machozi's life and impact in this session. And today we celebrate his life and witness. We celebrate it with this colloquium, an event long in the waiting, as we are actually right upon the heels of his 10-year anniversary of his death. This event has been a dream in the making, to honor this exemplary alumnus. It has been a dream in the making to offer a colloquium of the School of Theology that leans into its distinctive legacy and the distinctive gifts of this school, its faculty, its doctoral students, its alumni. It has been a dream in the making to be a ray of hope and advocacy in these deeply troubled times, to provide a platform for impactful conversation, mutual dialogue and learning, partnerships, advocacy, and activism for issues that plague our world today and that are in desperate need of visibility, in desperate need of the power of convening, and in need of hopeful actions and outcomes. And I can just name a few of these things. We know these in the room. The crisis, the ecological crisis of our planet, and the hope of ecological justice. The disintegration of democratic principles, and the hope of shared, hospitable community across divisions and human-imposed boundaries. The normalizing of war and oppression versus a staunch commitment to the principles and practices of peace. Every dream starts with a first step, leading to a gathering, leading to a movement, with the hope of ripples of impactful, transformative repercussions. And so we gather today in that hope and in that advocacy. I offer my profound gratitude to the organizers of this event, the dream team of Nicolette Manglos-Weber, Jimmy McCarty, and Felipe Maya. Thank you so much for your work, the hard preparations and vision that has gone into this. I offer my deep thanks to Jazz and Rebecca, alongside Andrew Kimball and Sarah Schultz for their providing logistical support, as well as Kimmy McDonald, who has provided marketing and communication support. And I add my thanks to the RCT and community life staff and student workers for all that you've done to really make this day possible. Thank you to each and every one of you. And so it is my great joy and honor to invite Dr. Felipe Maya, Assistant Professor of Theology, to introduce our esteemed plenary speaker for this opening session. Welcome.
Thank you and good afternoon. It's good to see this room full of people. It's my joy to welcome all of you to the inaugural Father Vincent Machozi Colloquium, Ecologies of Peacemaking. And on behalf of our planning team, Dean Nicolette Manglos-Weber, Dr. Jimmy McCarty, I'm very grateful to welcome you and share our joy that this gathering is finally taking place. We're especially thankful to Dean Pak for the vision that helped launch this colloquium series at the Boston University School of Theology. We also want to recognize our colleague, Dr. Becky Copeland, who was part of the original team that designed this event, and we're delighted to have her with us as a panelist, even as she enjoys her well-deserved sabbatical. I also want to echo Dean Pak's words of gratitude for our wonderful staff, Sarah Schultz, Andrew Kimball, Kim McDonald, Jazz Osman, Rebecca Newberger, and the staff of the Tom Porter Religion and Conflict Transformation Program and the Community Life Office. So thank you for our staff. So the theme, ecologies of peacemaking, emerged more or less organically as we were dreaming about this place and asking ourselves how to convene scholars, religious leaders, and practitioners working where environmental degradation, economic inequality, and violent conflict converge. We are imagining peacemaking not as an isolated event, but as an ecosystem, a coalition of movements committed to nurturing creation while resisting injustice. This colloquium is one small collective effort to cultivate such ecologies of solidarity and to discern the distinctive contributions religious communities can make to this work. In choosing the title, we also honor the life and witness of Father Vincent Machozi, a Boston University alumnus who was murdered because of his organizing for peace and ecological justice in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In our opening keynote address this afternoon, we will learn more about his life and his legacy. And it is therefore my joy and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Dana L. Robert, who is the William Fairfield Warren Distinguished Professor at Boston University and the Director for the Center of Global Christianity and Mission, a leading historian of mission and world Christianity, and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Robert has taught at STH since 1984. Along with Emeritus Professor John Hart, she served as one of Father Machozi's academic advisors during his PhD studies here at the School of Theology. So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Dana Robert.
It's a great honor for me to be here today at this long-awaited occasion to honor my former student. Before I begin, though, I would like to welcome members of the Assumptionist community, Father Vincent Machozi's religious community, who've come to join us in honor of their brother. So if they wouldn't mind standing, please join me in welcoming all the members of the Assumptionist community. Thank you. We're so happy to have you here and know that you are dear friends, brothers, and colleagues of Father Vincent. On March 20th, 2016, Father Vincent Machozi, AA, said Mass in his home village in Beni, North Kivu Province, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It was Palm Sunday, the beginning of Passion Week, the week of Christ's suffering and death that Christians commemorate, leading to the resurrection. Father Vincent followed up the religious services by meeting that night in the village social center to reflect on peacemaking with a group of Nandi tribal elders. Roughly a dozen heavily armed soldiers dressed in the uniforms of the DRC military stormed the building and riddled Father Vincent with bullets. Onlookers, who had tried in vain to hide him, reported that his last words were, "Why are you killing me?" Like the Passion of Christ, whose path to torture and death was set by his denunciation of the powerful who exploited people in the temple for financial gain, the assassination of Father Vincent occurred because he denounced the powerful. According to Father Mulumba Kambali Matsangani, a fellow Assumptionist, Father Vincent was a martyr of the truth. His home area in Kivu was the site, and is still the site, of ongoing war that had displaced or killed over 4 million people since 2010. Rival armed militias tortured and murdered the inhabitants as they seized the rare mineral coltan, a necessary component of cell phones. In a brutal example of how the rich benefit from the exploitation of the poor and the destruction of their land, the cooling of cell phone gadgetry and other accoutrements of modern technology rely upon the hand labor of miners, often children, who dig pits and pan for coltan. Profits flow from the global sale of coltan by the Rwandan government, far in excess of Rwanda's own supply. Shortly before his assassination, Father Vincent had accused Congo President Kabila and Rwandan President Kagame of conspiring to raid Kivu to seize coltan and of genocide against his people. When Father Mulumba proclaimed that Father Vincent Machozi was a martyr, he did not mean that he was officially declared as such by the Roman Catholic Church, a process that can take decades, if not centuries. But in calling Machozi a martyr, he meant that he gave his life as a witness. The meaning of the biblical concept martyr is that of witness. So what does it say? What does it mean to say that Vincent Machozi was a witness to the truth? I argue in this paper that the truth to which Matsongani referred was that of the reign of God. The Assumptionist fathers, the Augustinians of the Assumption, are passionate for the kingdom of God. Their motto is, "Thy kingdom come." Living in community, Assumptionists go in mission to where people's humanity is threatened. As teachers and ecumenists, Assumptionists witness to the full humanity of all people made in God's image. And in such witness, they seek to make present shalom, God's reign of peace and justice. This paper then explores how the passion of Father Vincent Machozi witnesses to the kingdom of God. To unpack what these values meant in practice to Father Vincent, I will first discuss his background and how he lived out his priorities as a Congolese Roman Catholic priest, an Assumptionist, and a scholar. Then I will connect how several themes from his life reflects the traditions of the Boston University School of Theology and its graduates. Finally, I shall reflect on what Father Vincent's witness means for the values of the theology school, and I dare say of Boston University in general. How does his witness connect to that of other graduates to the theology school? Vincent's doctoral fields of study were ethics and missions. He was in the first cohort of students in the conflict transformation program. My reflections then are based on my memories of my beloved former doctoral advisee. I'm also privileged to call upon at the end of my talk the Reverend Tom Porter, founder of the Religion and Conflict Transformation Program, and for whom our program is named. Father Vincent was his teaching fellow. So after I reflect upon how Vincent's witness aligns with the traditions of STH, Tom will speak briefly about our program in peace building and conflict transformation and Father Vincent's legacy in that field. Now, the name Machozi means son of tears. He was born one of 13 children of his parents in 1965. He was given that name because of the loss of his siblings in childbirth and childhood. The Kivu area lies in the easternmost part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, bordered by Rwanda and Uganda. The mineral riches of the area have been the source of conflicts among militias, especially since the mid-1990s, when movements to overthrow President Mobutu originated there. The 1994 Rwandan genocide destabilized the region because of thousands of Rwandan refugees. Mass rapes, tortures, and killings of civilians by competing political factions accelerated at that time. By the early 2000s, the Beni region descended into war among military factions competing to control the mineral resource coltan. Coltan extraction has reaped millions of illegal profits for the governments in the region. It supports military operations and various predatory elites. Now, Father Vincent received his early education in a Baptist school, and here you see a timeline of his educational accomplishments. At age 17, he entered a school run by the Assumptionists. This Francophone religious community had a very strong presence in Kivu, with a focus on education and other ministries. With the rapid growth of Catholicism in Africa during the 1980s and 90s, vocations to the priesthood also increased, and the Assumptionists expanded in Congo. So you see here how he received his BA in philosophy at the Assumptionist College in 1993. Then he got his degrees in theology, his licentiate, pastoral experience in Tanzania, and was ordained an Assumptionist priest in 1994 in France. Between 1998 and 2003, he sought at Saint Eugene de Mazenot Institute a theologate in Kinshasa, DRC, Congo. And he was secretary for religious life in the office of the Catholic bishops of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, these important positions in both theological education and mentoring clerical vocations show that Father Vincent was a significant emerging leader with a very important future, potentially as professor of theology, maybe as a bishop, and the head of his religious community. And every opportunity he got, he also served in rural parishes in his home diocese. But fate would intervene to change the course of his life. By 2003, the human rights situation in North Kivu province had deteriorated terribly, including, as you see here, the forced labor of children in coltan mining. As he spoke out against human rights abuses, Father Vincent Machozi was advised to leave the country to protect his life. So it seemed an opportune time for him to finish his education and become qualified academically for a top leadership position as theologian. Thus, between 2004 and 2006, he studied for his MA in social ethics at Boston College, and in September of 2006, he enrolled at the Boston University School of Theology in our THD program. While in Boston, Father Vincent lived in the Formation House for the Assumptionists in Brighton. Although they were a large and growing community in Congo, in the U.S., vocations had declined and elderly fathers remained. Father Vincent devoted himself to care of elderly priests and brothers in Brighton. The Augustinian charism stressed the importance of community life, so Father Vincent happily remained grounded in this Assumptionist community while studying at Boston University. The elderly Assumptionists undertook to support him financially in his doctoral program. Now, at the time Father Vincent was enrolled, the THD program was structured around a major and a minor. Ethics was the logical major, given his interests in what he told me was his goal to, quote, initiate Congolese people in the mission of social transformation, peace building at this particular time of turmoil in the DR Congo, close quote. He studied with Professor John Hart, a fellow Roman Catholic and liberation theologian, and here in the picture we see Professor Chung Chai-shek, a sociologist. In addition, in 2004, STH had initiated an experimental program in religion and conflict transformation by hiring the lawyer, the Reverend Tom Porter of Just Peace, to teach the first courses, along with Rodney Peterson of the BTI. And they taught a trial course called Engaging Conflict Well. So in 2006, when Vincent entered our program, that was the same time that the Religion and Conflict Transformation was officially launched, with BU as the anchor school for what became a BTI certificate. Now, for his minor, Father Vincent selected missions. As an Assumptionist, he was a member of a missionary community. In Congo, Assumptionists founded educational institutions, were present in conflict zones, and international students in the School of Theology were part of growing missionary churches and were sometimes drawn to our unusual positioning as a research university with a specialization in mission studies. As an African theologian, Father Vincent studied with me and my late husband, Enith Staniel, both of whom were faculty in African studies and taught courses on African religions. One of the things I most enjoyed about Vincent's student days were when, under the aegis of the Center for Global Christianity and Mission, he invited the great theologian Jean-Marc Ella to the School of Theology. We sat right down here. Vincent translated for his visit, so we hosted this truly great theologian that was a friend of Vincent's. When Father Vincent came to my office, one of the first things I suggested was that he become involved in the African Studies Center in the university, because back then the THD did not include full funding. But African Studies had scholarship money to hire African doctoral students to work in the center, to teach languages and do outreach. I advised him to attend the weekly Rodney seminars in African Studies. Thus, after one semester in the program, Father Vincent was ready to apply for a full scholarship from the African Studies Center. And in his letter to me requesting a recommendation, he indicated he regularly attended the Rodney seminars and would teach 2 African languages. He also, in his letter, shared with me another reason for why, as a Catholic priest, he decided to apply to Boston University. And this is a quotation from the letter he wrote me. He was an ecumenist. He believed in the unity of all believers. Although the early Assumptionists sought to unify Catholics and Orthodox under the aegis of Rome, Vincent had focused on outreach among and collegial relationships with Protestants in Congo. In Kivu, Catholics fled to Protestant churches for refuge and vice versa. So ecumenism on the ground was very important in his ministry in Congo. And he wrote, "I must finish my studies in 2011 to help others study like me. As a pastor in a rural parish in the Kivu province, I witnessed the need of having skills to address social, cultural, economics, and political issues when ministering to displaced people because of ethnic conflict. Our Catholic parish will become very often a house for all neighbors in need, regardless of their denominational belongings. Catholics also find refuge in Protestant church buildings. This experience led Protestant pastors and Catholic priests to start an ecumenical group of reflection in Butembo, a town in North Kivu province, eastern Congo. From this experience, I've become an ecumenical person, a fact which justifies partly why I came to BU." Now, Father Vincent had been one of the founders of this ecumenical group, so he wasn't just talking abstractly. This was his group that he had founded. Over the course of his studies in the theology school, he obtained financial support from the African Studies Center, and that relieved some of that pressure on the elderly Assumptionists to support him. He submitted a paper on the peace process in Congo at the 2007 Student Conference of the African Studies Association. His main job in African studies was to assist Dr. Barbara Brown in the outreach program. A few years after beginning his doctoral work, Father Vincent was attached as a priest to Immaculate Conception Church in Everett, a multinational parish with a large body of Francophones, Haitians. So in addition to his studies and his work in the African Studies Center, he had regular parish responsibilities among immigrant Catholics. This was one busy man. Even as he completed his doctoral exams and undertook his priestly service, he tried to help the situation back home. Over 70 different armed groups were preying upon the people in North Kivu. As time went on, he became more frustrated that academic work was not going to solve the terrible problem of oppression in his homeland. And as stories of atrocities flowed in, Vincent launched an online website called Beni Lubero to document the appalling human rights abuses against the Nande and other peoples there. Now, different sources, it was sometime between 2006 and 2010. You know, it started informally and then became more and more organized. From his base at BU, Vincent coordinated the posting of graphic photographs taken by informants and supporters, as well as articles describing and analyzing the situation. And so, ironically, the very coltan that was the source of people's oppression made possible the cell phones they used to snap photographs of the raped, tortured, and murdered. In principle, Beni Lubero did not shy away from graphic documentation. Dr. Barbara Brown recalls how Vincent told her about their methods. 2 informants at a time would go to an internet cafe, one to stand guard and one to upload the documentation. Although the Assumptionists supported Vincent's human right documentation, it was decided that his website would be in his own name out of fear of reprisals against the vulnerable Assumptionists working in North Kivu. By 2009, 2 of his close friends in Congo had been killed for their advocacy work. And yet, even while conscientizing other students at BU, his frustration grew. He wanted to be with the people in their suffering. And so he began to talk about going back. He needed to be where people were dying. Now, being so busy, his academic work of formulating his dissertation stretched out further and further. Thus, in 2012, Father Vincent decided to take a leave of absence from his doctoral work and return to Congo. His return coincided with an even greater increase in violence. Several months after Vincent's return, 3 Congolese Assumptionist priests were kidnapped by armed marauders and their bodies never found. Vincent himself received repeated death threats. He stayed in different safe houses to avoid being in the same place multiple nights in a row. Professor Hart and I would send verbal messages of encouragement via intermediaries who would send us occasional greetings from Vincent. In 2014, he was elected the head of the Nande Elders, an important communal leadership role. Now, I think 2015 marked a couple of really important turning points. By then, Vincent realized he would be unable to complete his dissertation. He therefore petitioned to receive the STM degree and basically gave up his doctoral work. A second turning point occurred when from Rome, the combined religious congregations that had workers in the Diocese of Butembo Beni issued a message of solidarity with the people in the diocese. This important statement demonstrated that Vincent's documentation work was helping to bring global attention to, quote, the slaughter of unarmed civilians. And the heads of the religious communities issued a graphic statement about the killing and murders and how many hundreds of people were being killed all the time. The assembled religious congregations denounced the violence and called upon respect for all persons who are made in the image of God. They thanked those working in such a brutal context and encouraged them to keep their mission and their hope alive. And they said, "It is our duty and privilege to give witness to our people by an example of fraternal love, of solidarity, and of mutual sharing that shows that ethnic differences are a source of strength and goodness and not of division and hatred. We encourage you, dear Major Superiors, to form religious in the areas of justice and peace, of psychosocial services, and of communications for the effective running of your communities and your apostolic activities." So you see, these religious leaders were encouraging the ongoing documentation of the facts on the ground. And that's why I actually think that the 2015 statement of the combined religious was important because they explicitly encouraged documentation. That placed the actions of Father Vincent and his website, Beni Libera, into the theological realm of religious obligation to support human rights. Now, after Vincent was assassinated, he was immediately called a martyr by the Nande Catholics, but other ethnic groups claimed he was a political figure who was helping his own people rather than everyone. So immediately his death, well, the meaning of his death was disputed. As a church historian, though, I would be prepared to argue that the letter by the heads of the religious congregations that included the Assumptionists, the White Fathers, the Order of the Holy Cross, the Priests of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and others, placed Vincent's human rights work into the center of Christian theological motivation, and therefore could open a technical case for proclaiming him an official martyr. But of course, I'm not a Roman Catholic, so this is not up to me. But I remember that Vincent, who taught canon law, used to talk about the meaning of Catholicity, not only as unity, but as fullness. And certainly, defending the humanity of people made in the image of God is part of being Catholic in this both generic and specific sense. Now, after Father Vincent was assassinated, a photograph of his body riddled with bullets was put on the website of Beni Libero. As was said of the 1980 sisters martyred in El Salvador, he suffered, quote, "the same fate as the poor." Now, I have this picture here that I've saved. I'm going to show it briefly. You can close your eyes if you wish, but this is what he wanted. He would have wanted his body shown as evidence of human rights abuses. So, in the exposure of his murdered body to public gaze, he followed in the passion of his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and in the suffering of his widowed mother, who was nearby when her son was assassinated. We recall the sufferings of Mary, whose assumption into heaven was a focal point for the organization of Machozi's religious congregation. Vincent had at least three memorial services. First was the funeral service you see here, conducted by his priestly colleagues. Second was a memorial service in Everett that I attended, and the service and following dinner at the Immaculate Conception was a stirring multicultural celebration of his life with contributions from the different ethnic groups that made up that church and the participation of multiple Catholic priests. Thirdly, we held a memorial service in Marsh Chapel, a combined effort of the African Studies Center and the School of Theology. A year after his assassination, a procession of people in North Kivu commemorated him as martyr. Sadly, nobody has been convicted of Father Vincent Machozi's murder. Now that I've described something of the life of Vincent as a graduate student at BU and beyond, let me turn to the second part of my talk, which is to reflect briefly on ways in which the witness of Father Vincent reflects the traditions of the School of Theology and continues to inspire us at Boston University. Now, I've already noted that the motto of Assumptionists is, "Thy kingdom come." This goal, to live for the fulfillment of that state of justice, peace, and righteousness for which Jesus lived and prayed, is consistent with the social ethics tradition of the School of the Prophets. To value every person made in God's image is consistent with a Methodist holiness and personalist anthropologies in which, from the beginning of our history, women and men were encouraged to work together, both for self-improvement and for social transformation. So let me focus briefly on a few aspects of Vincent's life and witness that intersect with the history and traditions of the School of Theology. Seeing Vincent's work in dialogue with our communal identity is a way to strengthen our resolve and to inspire us to go forward. I will pursue briefly two intersecting themes. One, that of African leadership and ethical outreach, and second, the relationship between community and care for the land. Now, I have a lot of details here, and you'll have to wait for the published version for all these little historical details to come out. The significant involvement of the School of Theology and Africa goes back to the early 20th century, but dates robustly from the middle third. And here you see this pioneer book by the then professor of missions, Basil Matthew, called Consider Africa, which is one of the first church-based texts about Africa. By the 1950s, Northern American Methodists had developed extensive ministries in Congo, Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Liberia, and Angola. And so you see here a number of our alums that I've listed here who were early missionaries to some of these areas. So you see also that you've got Professor Harold DeWolf, a doctoral advisor of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who in his vacations went and taught at the Methodist Seminary in then Rhodesia in the 1950s and 60s. And the whole string of our mission professors worked in Africa. Per Hossing, Norman Thomas, who was also an alum, Martinez Daniel were all missionaries in Africa. By the 1950s, you can see that the missionary legacy significantly was overlapping the human and civil rights struggles against settler colonialism and apartheid in Angola and Rhodesia. We often forget here that the domestic civil rights struggle led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was part of a global struggle against white racism and colonialism. So the STH connections in the 1950s more and more included Africans coming on the tail of that missionary legacy. And STH faculty and graduates were transcultural bridges between North America and Africa. So there were a number of African-American human rights activists who attended the School of Theology, including Dr. Isaac Bivens, Assistant General Secretary of the General Board of Global Ministries, who were helping to guide denominational efforts into Africa and supporting liberation struggles in Africa. Now, with 2 degrees from STH in the 1950s, here's a picture of the Reverend Doug Moore with Dr. King. And Doug Moore organized the first sit-ins to desegregate Durham, North Carolina in 1957. He convinced Dr. King of the importance of the sit-in as a form of nonviolent action. Moore also was mentor to Reverend James Lawson. As a black nationalist, Moore became a missionary in the Congo in the early 1960s before returning to work in politics in Washington, D.C. This network of human rights activism probably is the most visible in the work of Bishop Ralph Dodge. Ralph Dodge mentored the independence leaders of 3 different countries. He mentored Antonio Neto, who was his secretary in Angola, and supported his study abroad. And he was the founder and president of the MPLA and of the People's Republic of Angola. Dodge's friend Eduardo Mondlane became the first president of Frelimo in Mozambique. And among the more than 100 Zimbabweans sponsored by Dodge and the Methodist Church for scholarships, crusade scholarships, for overseas study was Abel Tenkai Muzorewa, his successor as bishop, who became Prime Minister of Rhodesia. So you can see why Dodge was ejected from Rhodesia by the Smith regime in 1964. Similarly, Norman Thomas, our mission professor, was banned from Rhodesia, and similarly, Martinez Daniel was put in front of a military tribunal and was to be tried for treason. So we've got this legacy of human rights advocacy. So this kind of mentorship also spreads then to this very important African alum, Bishop Josiah Kabira, who was sent to the School of Theology by Lutheran missionary Bent Sunkler, who paid for his degree from the Lutheran World Federation in the early 1960s. After Kabira earned his theology degree, he returned to Tanzania and was elected the first African Lutheran bishop of Buea, Tanzania. He led the opening worship at the 1968 Uppsala Assembly of the WCC and was the first president of the Lutheran World Federation and found himself in charge of the decolonization of global Lutheranism. Quite a lot of work in the 1960s. The headquarters of the All Africa Conference of Churches are named for him. Another important piece of educating emerging African leaders was the study of social ethics, a field pioneered by our Dean Walter Mulder. Although Mulder's idea of the responsible society was outdated during the era of nationalist revolution, his methods of ethical analysis and the personalist framework retained great relevance for the global human rights movement. Pacifism was also central to Mulder's legacy. And his former students were our series of ethics professors, Paul Dietz, John Cartwright, and Chung Chai-shek. Now, the last person that I mentioned in this context then is Professor Mogeti Matlabi, who I think in 1980 was, as far as I could tell, the first African to receive a doctorate in social ethics at Boston University. Matlabi was the student of Paul Dietz and Walter Mulder. Like Vincent Machozi, Mogeti Matlabi had studied for the Catholic priesthood, but he instead became a lay theologian. He was a proponent of the Black consciousness movement in South Africa and procured a position with the Black Theology Project of the University Christian Movement. When all the people above him in the organization were banned and forbidden from publishing by the apartheid regime, Matlabi's name was put on what is seen as the very first book on Black theology in South Africa, published in 1973. With the help of the Reverend Desmond Tutu, then head of the Theological Education Fund, Matlabi was guaranteed support for his doctorate here at Boston University. And if you read his autobiography, you can see how much he relied on Walter Mulder and Paul Dietz's work on Methodism and social strategy for his dissertation on Black resistance to apartheid. He also studied in the African Studies Center and took courses with people there. So you're starting to see that when African students come, they're working across the university also between African studies and theology. When Father Vincent Machozi came to Boston University, he became part of this interracial, multi-denominational, and transnational network that from the mid-20th century combined African leadership, missional ecumenism, social ethics and human rights, and practical outreach. The Boston University values of persons made in God's image flourished via the creative stance that social ethics requires concrete activism. The civil rights tradition we prize in our history was part of this larger focus on the well-being of the human person in global community. The spectrum of African activism ranged seamlessly across education through pastoral work to direct action for social transformation and scholarship. And so Vincent's activism that resulted in his murder shows us that for the School of Theology, the beloved community is African. Now, the next category, the last category of relevance for our tradition I wish to pursue is that of the life of Vincent Machozi in the importance of communitarianism, that care for the poor and care of the earth cohere in the building of both local and global community. The relationship between people and land and the human being as God's creation has become more recently in the work of STH graduates a focus who see God's image grounded in fellowship. The work of the kingdom of God begins here on earth in an expanded and very concrete view of fellowship with each other in relationship with God's created world. Notable STH students in the 1920s and 30s had a significant bias toward living in intentional community, a progressive movement of that era with roots in socialism, anti-capitalism, and pacifism. And remember that Walter Milner himself was a socialist and a pacifist, as well as a strong believer in working toward God's kingdom. We've already mentioned that the Assumptionists, Vincent's community, focus on community life and building the kingdom. So the idea of beloved community in practice means building actual communities. So lack of time doesn't allow me to say much about these graduates, but their commitments reveal the DNA that joins Father Vincent with this line of communitarianism. First to mention is Ralph Templin, the consummate radical pacifist, human rights activist, and communitarian. He went to India as a missionary with his wife in 1925 to work in villages. He was struck there by the power of the small community. And he said, the small vital community to adjust man to his earth seems to have been the crux of all economic and social progress. The loss of this power by the destruction of the small community or by its neglect has brought decay and death. The Templins then lived in the ashram founded by E. Stanley Jones. And after they were expelled from India for refusing to sign the loyalty oath to the British, he founded the Harlem Ashram. Now, those of you who know the history of the Harlem Ashram know that that is what desegregated the YMCA in New York. It's where people like Pauline Murray and others lived when they were living in New York. They were one of the first to work for Puerto Rican independence. I mean, this is a group that introduced nonviolent direct action into the United States. And one of their participants, one of their members, they brought from India to write a handbook on nonviolent activism. So you've got Ralph Templin there. After he left the ashram, he became head of the pacifist community School of Living in Suffern, New York. Agrarianism, simplicity, and democracy were hallmarks of the whole homesteading community. Now, there's a whole connection here with the beginning of organic food, farming and organic food that I don't have time to mention, but it came out of this communitarian experiment. The second one I want to just mention is Harold Rickard here, who, he and Mrs. Rickard went to Okinawa after World War II. The Rickards resolved to work in Japan for justice and reconciliation. They found themselves face to face with an American military decree that was seizing 25% of Okinawa to build large naval and army bases. So in addition to their more traditional mission work, even though Okinawan churches were afraid to act, Harold Rickard repeatedly stood in solidarity with Japanese farmers whose land was seized at gunpoint by the U.S. military, their homes and buildings bulldozed, and their crops torched. So for 31 years on Okinawa and Japan, Rickard maintained strong intercultural friendships with local farmers. So Harold Rickard was an activist in the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and he teamed up with another missionary from Vermont, another Methodist missionary from Vermont, and they confronted the U.S. High Commissioner about the continuing confiscation of Okinawan land. In 1982, the Rickards returned to Vermont, where they continued their life of advocacy. I need to briefly mention, of course, Tex Evans, founder of the Appalachia Service Project. Again, we have some incredible alums in terms of work in community life and the land that we never talk about here. So I just had to bring these up. Tex Evans founded a group that over 50 years brought 440,000 volunteers in Appalachia to repair homes and care for people in the area. And finally, there's the agricultural missionary Jim Gully, who was in Haiti during the terrible earthquake of 2010. And then I have to just mention that part of the purpose of founding the Center for Global Christianity and Mission in 2001, its main purpose was to support ecological education and a grassroots tree planting movement among African-initiated churches in Zimbabwe. That was its original purpose. So STH communitarians have witnessed to Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven through solidarity with specific communities. The well-being of communities involves care for the land. When Vincent Machozi gave his life to support his people's rights to the integrity of their land against the outside imperialist forces taking their natural resources, he was witnessing to the revolutionary insight that peaceful community requires responsible relationship with the natural world. Reconciliation in light of God's reign requires just and sustainable relationships with God's creation. To conclude my talk about the legacy of advocacy and peace building, eco-justice and witness at the School of Theology, as exemplified in the life and death of Father Vincent Machozi, I can think of nothing better than to introduce the Reverend Tom Porter, founder of the STH Religion and Conflict Transformation program that bears his name. Thomas W. Porter is a trial lawyer, mediator, teacher, and minister. He established the Conflict Transformation Program in 2006, the year that Vincent came to BU. He founded and directed from 20 to 2012 the Just Peace Center for Mediation and Conflict Transformation in the United Methodist Church, and has edited and written quite a number of books, of which I've put some names here. He has an MDiv and a JD, and he's a noted mediator. He's an elder in the United Methodist Church. So to take the rest of my time, I would like to invite Thomas Porter to come up and connect us to the Conflict Transformation Program, which is such an essential part of Vincent's legacy. Tom.
So thank you, Dana, for inviting me to be part of this tribute to Vincent Machozi. And it's wonderful to see all of you, my old colleagues and young colleagues. I miss you, and I'm honored to be with you today. Dana always amazes me. The breadth of her knowledge, the connections she makes, and the humanity of her presentations and her writing. Dana was was a key player in the formation of the Religion and Conflict Transformation Program. She was part of the design team in 2004 and then continued on as an advisor to the program. It was a pleasure working with you, Dana. I had the good fortune to have Vincent as my teaching fellow in 2 semesters, fall of 2008 and the fall of 2009, in a course called Engaging Conflict Well, which later became the Spirit and Art of Conflict Transformation. Prior to that, he'd been a student in these courses, including a course entitled International Peacebuilding and the Ministry of Reconciliation. He went on to get the certificate in this program in the year 2011. Vincent was a brilliant, humble, a rather quiet and gentle soul, compassionate and kind. He was a significant presence because of his deep faith and his knowledge and commitment to peace building. The students found him very helpful and very wise in his comments on the papers and his comments on their presentations. Dana's already quoted, I don't know if you ended up quoting Shanti, you cut that one out, but she had a quote from Shanti Mokamatanda. I called up Shanti when I learned that Dana wanted me to participate here, and asked him, because he was a fellow student, and Shanti was the original program administrator of the program and served for many years in that role. So he knew Vincent well. Here's what he said of Vincent, and I wanted to quote this. He was a priest at heart. I often felt I was in the presence of a spiritual master, and not just a fellow student or colleague. He had an unwavering commitment to a just peace. He understood that the gospel of liberation was simultaneously a gospel of solidarity. He would talk about his calling to stand with and work alongside his community that was suffering unimaginable atrocities. As Dana pointed out, I was aware of his developing this website and saw some of what was being placed in that website. He would receive and publish these, as Dana pointed out, these atrocities that his people were experiencing. He never let the stories be silenced. I remember talks with him about his love for his home city of Goma. Goma and the community center that he funded there. He sent most of his money back to Goma, and he had this community center there. And Goma is at the center, is a large town, the biggest, I guess, 3rd largest town in the Congo, is at the center of these wars around coltan and this mineral, and 70 different militias fighting for the profits that go into our cell phones. We also talked of his anguish in not being with his people. He had come to Boston after death threats and the urging of his fellow Assumptionists. He appreciated the opportunities he had here in studying with Dana and with John, but he continued to struggle. And he finally decided that he needed to go home. Vincent reminded me of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was invited by Tillich and Niebuhr to come to Union Theological Seminary to lecture in safety. Not long after he arrived, a very short period of time after he arrived, he realized this was a mistake. He knew that he had to return, knowing that he was risking his life. Vincent also reminded me of Jesus and his commitment to return to Jerusalem, where he knew there were forces that wanted to kill him. Dana asked me, so I stand in awe of the courage, the faith, the commitment, and the love that guided Vincent in his return as he left his PhD studies receiving a master's degree. He knew the risk. he knew that he could be killed. Dana asked me to talk about the Religion Conference Conflict Transformation Program. The program grew out of the work of the Just Peace Center for Mediation and Conflict Transformation of the United Methodist Church and a meeting I had with Dean Ray Hart of the BU School of Theology in 2003. We talked about the studies showing seminary graduates experiencing burnout after experiencing a lot of conflict and leaving the ministry. Not a good idea. We also talked about the significant time ministers spend dealing with conflict and feeling totally unprepared. And finally, we talked about the studies showing destructive conflict as a major indicator of church decline. We also talked about the conflicts of our communities and the world and our call to be peace builders and to be reconcilers. He decided we should do something about this, and the result was a program in religion and conflict transformation. The good news is that Dr. James McCarthy is now taking this whole program to greater heights. And also my successor, Dr. Judith Olson, did as well, and she was my co-director for a period of time and then was the director after I retired and died an untimely death. Dana, we could talk about, I'm going to give you some of the highlights, but then I want to get to what I really want to talk about, okay? The program has 261 students who received the certificate. I think that's pretty amazing. We created courses, including online course and MOOCs, and including courses on restorative justice, which we taught with seminarians and law school students and social workers. Those classes really rocked. We could talk, we had travel seminars. I always loved being on a travel seminar with a group of students. We went to places like Lebanon and Syria, Israel and Palestine, Colombia, South America, South Korea, and southern India. There were the internships nationally and internationally, and a highlight always was the annual retreats led by distinguished religious peacemakers who would spend the weekend with us, and we also had workshops and clinics and a team of visiting researchers. We held 2 consultations or conferences of religious educators in other seminaries, in other universities, in other colleges, all working on the same kind of thing, and we spent those 2 sessions working on different themes, but learning from each other and supporting each other. The best, I bet, Jimmy, you'd agree with this, was the capstone retreat, when the people are getting their certificates. Tell us about what they've learned and about the experience. What I really want to talk about in the brief time I have are some of the themes Vincent and I taught. So get down to the real theology, the spiritual, the guts of this. I put these themes on a card. A group of bishops said, Tom, put everything you're talking about on a card that I can put in my pocket. I said, what are you talking about? How can you do that? They said, do it. And this is the result. And the interesting thing is it became the heart and soul of the spirit and art of conflict transformation. I have a bunch of these cards if anybody wants to get them after we finished. So what I'd like to do is, I think I'm doing this right. All right, I guess we can do this one at a time. So what I'd like to do is, we need to prepare ourselves, right, for this work. And I'm going to read what's in caps, and if you'll read the rest. Create a well, not a wall.
Create in yourself an openness to conflict as a natural and necessary part of God's creation, an opportunity for growth and revelation.
Allow the well to fill.
Open your heart and mind to God's love, drawing you toward reconciliation and being
Be well prepared. Wrong way, sorry. So that you might be well and also be a well. Now, we do all this not just to get dressed up, but to get engaged, right? So we are to engage others in conflict transformation. And the first point is create a commonwealth together.
Design a circle process for a good conversation to get to a better place together.
Share the well.
Together, open yourselves to God through ritual and to each other through a relational covenant.
Appreciate the life-giving waters.
Listen stories of peak experiences, grace-filled moments, and dreams of a preferred future.
Go beneath the surface.
Move from positions to interests and needs, generating options to reach consensus.
Drink deeply the healing waters.
Move from retribution to restoration, healing the harm, affirming accountability, and creating a new relationship.
So we can be well together.
Celebrate each step toward communal healing. Be prayerful, persistent, and patient.
So these are some of the themes, and as you can imagine, there are many others that guided us in our work and our teaching as Vincent and I taught together. One question that I think you'll be considering or thinking about during this week is how do you prepare yourself and how do you prepare others to face and engage evil? Vincent was my teacher on this subject. He knew that God does not guarantee safety, but sustains us in everything and does have the last word. I would like to interview the people Vincent inspired in Goma and in Congo. I know I would see his spirit, his work, living on. We were gifted and honored to know you, Vincent.